Hello, good afternoon, everybody. It's Jenny here. I can see that I've got 18 of you on the line, which is a great turnout. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And we've also got Crystal on the line from Canada. Hello, Crystal.
Hello.
Excellent, brilliant. So I'm just going to just remind everyone why we've got together today. So we have this internal working group called a themed activity group, a TAG for short, and the responsibility of the TAG that I facilitate is around care and behaviour. And one of our key kind of remits under this TAG is around the public or consumers' acceptability of livestock production systems. And so with that in mind, we've been having several discussions around consumers' opinions and perceptions of our industry and what AHDB could do possibly in the future, and trying to frame a bit of a strategy around that. And back in November, I came across food integrity when I was doing a Google search to prepare a board paper for our dairy board. And ever since then, I've been a bit intrigued about what food integrity does. And so with that, I proposed to the TAG the possibility of perhaps inviting food integrity to do an internal webinar for my TAG and for additional staff. So it's been advertised to all AHDB, all of my AHDB colleagues, Crystal. And so without further ado, I think I will hand over the controls to you, and perhaps you can give us a short introduction into yourself, and then we will look forward to hearing more about what food integrity does and what the future holds for you guys.
Sure, that's great. Thank you so much for the invite and the opportunity to join your group today. I wish I was there in person. It would be much more fun than by webinar, but modern technology is bringing us together. So my name is Crystal. I'm the president of the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity. My background is I grew up on a dairy and beef farm near Ottawa, Canada, and I've been a lifelong advocate and connector between farm and city since I was a child, basically. So my degree is in animal science and communication. So I'm one of those people that actually really uses my degree every day, connecting the two. And my first job out of university was working for a group called the Ontario Farm Animal Council, which represented all the livestock and poultry farmers in Ontario, which sounds similar to your group. And I spent 100 days a year at public events in urban centers with farm animals, talking to consumers. So I call that my time in the trenches of 6 years of 100 days a year of having real conversations with real people, many of whom have never seen a farm animal before. So that was early in my career. Then I went on to work for the pork producers, specifically Ontario Pork, and I created a new role of consumer and producer relations, combining the two, which included training farmers on how to speak up and do a better job of connecting with consumers, as well as some modern exhibits, which would include bringing sows and piglets into downtown areas as part of exhibits, which are still in play today. Then I went back. I was literally the summer student that became the executive director of Ontario Farm Animal Council. I managed that group for about 8 years. We merged together with the crop farmers when it was very apparent to us that people are having a conversation about food in general, not about specific sectors. Those two groups merged, and we formed what's called Farm and Food Care, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but might be of interest to you, which represented all kinds of farmers as well as the whole food system, with the goal to encourage other partners to invest and be part of this conversation. And then from there, went on to help bring the Center for Food Integrity to Canada, which is what we're going to talk about today. So basically, the long story short is I've been talking about food and farming my whole career. It's my passion, and with the mantra that my dad always taught me, that if you do what you love, you'll never have to work a day in your life. So that's my background, and I'm happy to share I'll share some high-level things about what we do with CCFI and how we were formed and kind of our spirit, and then we'll open it up for questions. If we were in person, I would encourage you to ask questions as we go along. It's a little challenging with technology, but of course you can always type in questions in the chat. So with that, we'll get started in the actual presentation. So I mentioned my background is farming, and you work with your 6 sectors and all the different types of farmers. So we are used to talking about farming, but you are not the target audience when it comes to the bigger picture. People are having conversations about food, not farming, which of course many of the topics are the same. But we absolutely feel it's a conversation about food and trust and people. So people that work within the food system, right back to the farm, and then of course the people that are eating our food. So I'd like you to maybe take your sector hats off and your technical hats off and really think about what the rest of the people in your jurisdiction are doing, and that's having conversations about food. So this concept of public trust and why that's our mission is to help the food system earn trust, and it's really evolved in Canada in the last few years to become apparent that this isn't just a nice thing to do. It's not just a communications thing we should do on the side. It's absolutely core to success for food and farming in our country. We have a lot of great innovation, a lot of opportunities to innovate, expand, export, etc. But if you don't have public trust, you won't be literally allowed to innovate. So I see in the last 3 years, I would say, a shift within our Canadian leadership in the food system, starting with farm leaders and going right through to our biggest food company partners, to say public trust is absolutely a core foundation which our whole sector needs to be successful. And just an example of that, part of our work is understanding research insights around public trust specifically, which with a big focus on consumers, which I'll share a bit about, but we also look at some of our food system partners. Last year, we did some work with the grains value chain. So that's everything from farmers that grow different types of grains right through our biggest retail partners, and ask them a lot about public trust and how they manage it. And you'll note that consumer reactions to new production practices, changes in government policies and regulations rated higher, much higher concerns than sales and profits and market conditions. So just to reflect that this is absolutely, we look at this as a business risk that needs to be managed ideally proactively and obviously sometimes reactively. So a few key principles on public trust to just kind of frame up our thinking around it. Many of you work in areas such as R&D, technical improvement, best management practices, and of course on the farm, that's a core to doing business every day. It's really important that we frame trust starts with doing the right thing. This is not an ad campaign to say, trust us, we're doing everything right. You actually have to do the right thing with that continuous improvement model. Social license is a term we've heard in Canada since the 90s, coined by the oil industry and used by the forestry industry as well. We started using that term in agriculture a few years ago and quickly determined that is not the right goal. Social license is the freedom to operate without restrictions. So again, just reiterating, our real goal is earning trust, maintaining the trust we have and continually earning it every day. This conversation around trust is not unique to agri-food. Every business sector in our country is having the conversation about trust and transparency. And it's obviously not unique to Canada. You're interested as well. This is definitely a conversation happening in the developed world for sure. We see the trends coming from the EU and the UK into the US and into Canada. There's nothing that we're talking about right now that you probably didn't already face as an issue at least 10 years ago. And then I would add Australia into the mix. And I say the developing world, although we'll see it move even more quickly in the developed world, we already see it, and we'll see it moving more quickly in the developing world. As if we think of a country like China, for example, we'll start asking for things like, better animal welfare or GMO-free products because they see Americans specifically with it. We view public trust as a pre-competitive issue and a collaborative issue, not a competitive space, and we're not there yet. Obviously, many of our food system partners, if you think of major retailer restaurants, are very competitive companies, and unfortunately, they compete on things like animal welfare, environment, food safety, and labeling. And this is something that we're working really hard to shift thinking to say public trust needs to be a base and then you bolt on your competitive advantage on top of that. I mentioned earlier, this isn't just a communications problem, it's absolutely viewed as a business challenge. And in the last few years, I would say the game has changed in terms of the significance of investing in trust. So in Canada, a couple of years ago now, 2 years ago, our now chair is a gentleman by the name of Kim McConnell. He and another leader of a major food and farm agribusiness company, together with about 10 other people, including myself, started this conversation about what does it take to earn trust in Canadian food and farming. And this group, small group led by my now chair, went across the country and held discussions with thought leaders in many of our provinces and across the sector. So government, food companies, retail, food service, farm leaders, to say, what do you think it takes to earn trust? And it came up with this trust framework, which starts with, as I mentioned, doing the right thing. And then the middle pillar in trusted assurance and verification systems, which would also include regulations, and then the need to communicate, and then connection and coordination between the three. And we see, quite frankly, in Canada right now, millions and millions of dollars invested in doing the right thing and trusted assurance systems, and then thousands, I'm being sarcastic, but very little being invested in communications. So there's definitely a gap here. So the need to coordinate and support between the three. And the base for all of them includes the commitment to transparency and continuous improvement. So an important part of trust includes acknowledging areas you need to improve. I'll just stop there for a minute and see if there's any questions that anybody wanted to type in on the trust framework and the base of trust before I move into CCFI specifically.
Thanks, Crystal. Just to let you all know that are listening, you have a question box, so please feel free to type your questions into the question box, and I will ask Crystal and facilitate those Q&A. Nothing's coming through, Crystal, so everything is clear so far.
Okay, great. Thank you. It's always good to check in because I sometimes wonder, am I just talking away to myself over here? So thank you for that.
Yes, it's a good idea because it's a strange platform doing a webinar because you can't get any feedback from the audience. So everyone's there still listening to you. So brilliant.
Thank you. So once that group had established that was the framework, the next step was to map out what's called the eco-structure, to map out kind of what's already being done. There are many, many good efforts already being done in many areas. So how do those piece together in what I would call a game plan? If you play soccer or football, what's the game plan? What does the map look like for building trust in Canada? And so divided it into these circles, which would include starting at the, with the common goal of public trust. So including the need for governance and guidance and some high level thinking, which they created a new public trust steering committee. And the next circle would be the circle I play in, which is research, forums, and training. So CCFI is considered a service provider to help the food system earn trust. So in a sport, I would be a coach and a whiteboard maker, and I would give you tools to do a better job. Then we have many value chains and sectors, and this is where your group would come in, which would include actually helping your sector partners do the right thing with your commitment to R&D, et cetera, as well as the opportunities for communications. And then in Canada, we have a few in the outside, we have many in the outside ring, which we call amplifiers. So these groups focus on communications more specifically, which would include targeting classrooms. That group I had mentioned I had helped found called Farm and Food Care. And then another effort called Agriculture More Than Ever, which focuses on getting farmers to speak up and tell their story. And then you'll see the regional implementation, because of course there are many, many efforts similar to what you would have in the UK with local fairs, local farmers themselves, individual efforts that would fit into what I would call tactics to amplify the good news message. But all these things need to be mapped out to see how can they fit together. And I'll come back to this, but this is an important piece that we'll refer to later. So enter CCFI. We were introduced in Canada in 2016 as a program of that group I had mentioned, Farm and Food Care originally, with this goal to help the Canada's food system earn trust. The U.S. Center for Food Integrity was launched way back in 2007, and of interest to your group, U.S. CFI was launched when the U.S. Soybean Board, which is the largest farm lobby in the USA, very significant, did a major risk assessment. And the #1 risk to U.S. soybean growers identified in 2007 was the loss of domestic livestock and poultry. So due to activist pressures, legal, markets, and including loss of public trust. So the U.S. Soybean Board literally took millions of dollars out of export development marketing funds and said, you know what, it's a bigger threat to us if the hog or poultry farm in Iowa goes out of business, and helped create the Center for Food Integrity with the spirit of the whole food system. Around the same time, we were working on creating Farm and Food Care in Canada. So we had partnered with the US Center for Food Integrity over many years, and then decided, you know what, this is a global conversation. It requires a lot of investment. If you notice, my name's Mackay, so I always say I'm a Scottish farm girl background. I'm like, can we not be more cost effective if we bring an existing model to Canada? And then, of course, as we like to joke, we spell center correctly in Canada, because of course in the US they spell it differently. I had to arm wrestle them for that one, but I won, luckily. We are an independent affiliate, so we pay a fee to the US Center for Food Integrity. But honestly, with 10 years of investment in amazing programming and thinking, it just made all kinds of sense to bring their programming to Canada and share in their research as the base. So we picked out of a long list of program options that they run south of the border on a much larger budget. We picked 4 key priority areas. The first being research on public trust and consumer expectations. So not around consumer research, you know, how much meat do you eat and how often, or you're vegetarian, not about what your food choices are, but how you view the food system as a citizen as opposed to a consumer. Dialogue, creating forums for dialogue for the entire food system to connect. A lot of people, when they think about public trust, focus on the consumers, and quite frankly, I feel we've underestimated the importance of connecting our food system internally with our own stakeholders, and so this is a second key pillar of our work. The third pillar is resources. What are some shared resources? Remember, I said this should not be a competitive issue, and I'll tell you a little bit about one that we use called Best Food Facts. And then the fourth pillar of our work is training on, so I can share with you the research on public trust and transparency, but if we use a sporting analogy, you can read a book on football, but that doesn't mean you're good at playing the game. So we haven't got there yet in our first 18 months, but it's in our priority box to develop resources to provide training to food system partners. A little bit about our structure. We are a unique structure and a little bit different than the US. The US is a nonprofit organization. In Canada, we actually have charitable status. So one of the pillars of charity is education and training, and our work is provided free to the public to help Canadians make informed decisions about their food. So individuals can actually donate to our organization and get a charitable receipt. This is really key, and I'll talk about our funding model when it comes to credibility. We do have a board of directors, and it is a skills-based board of individuals who are selected to represent the diversity of the food system. So they aren't nominated by an organization or a company. They're recruited based on their skill set and the area they live in Canada to be geographically diverse, and their skill set to say we need strategic excellence. It's a small board, which will go up to 9. We're at 7 board members currently. I mentioned our funding model. So we have a unique mix of 3 categories of funders: individual donors that can get a charitable receipt. We have members that fund our core budget, which I'll explain. And then we have program supporters. And as I say here, the broader, the better. We were launched in June of 2016 as a program of farm and food care, since we already had an existing organization. And I'm not sure about your country, but in Canada, we have way too many organizations, specifically on the farm side. It is almost ridiculous how many organizations we have. So I personally have a feeling that we need to amalgamate more, bring more together, and get some efficiencies. So that's how we started Center for Food Integrity. And something for you to think about if you wanted to bring this work to the UK is you can launch it as a program, and then we did evolve to become a full organization just a year ago. And when we talk about how much we've accomplished, really, I'm too close to it and obviously biased, but when I look at our annual report, which I encourage you to do, it's pretty amazing how much we can accomplish in a first full year of being an organization, and with full credit to the fact we brought an existing model to Canada. We already had an existing vehicle from the US that we could put a Canadian flag on and make sure we delivered in Canada effectively. So here's an example of our members. So in our first, we launched with 18 members in June of 2016, and now we have 34 members in the first 18 months. And you'll note it's a mix of, a really great mix of farm groups, provincial governments, food companies, agri-food businesses, agribusinesses. We've got deans, we've got academia, we've got restaurants, and most recently we just received some funding from the Walmart Foundation on a big food loss and waste related program. So we'll add retail for the first time to this list of mix. So when you look at our annual report, you won't just see 34 companies, you'll see 34 companies and hundreds of individual donors and partners. And we're very transparent with our funders, and our credibility comes from the diversity of our funding. We don't advocate for any positions or sectors or companies. We advocate for helping the food system earn trust, and to help consumers make informed decisions about their food. So our funding model is, our core budget is about $1 million, of which approximately $600,000 comes from membership, and the other $400,000 comes from donors and program supporters to date. And individual donors, of course, the sky's the limit. We have individuals that throw in $50 up to, it could be unlimited, obviously. Program supporters, so these people sponsor, or organizations sponsor events, and or they could be smaller associations that and or companies that can't afford or don't feel they need to be a member per se, but they believe in the vision and they can support a program. And then our members, I mentioned the categories, and those are the dollar amounts. Going back to the big picture, there is a North American membership option, which, we have some larger companies that do business both sides of the border, and they see great value in having North American comparisons and opportunities to access research from both sides of the border. So I mentioned the first pillar of our work is based in public trust research and consumer insights and expectations. I'm not going to go through all of our research results today. Obviously, that's a whole other talk, but you can download our research reports. I would suggest you read the 2016 one first. That was our base public trust model. There is a peer-reviewed and published public trust model, which for those of us with logical brains, it gives us some heart to know that there's stats and a published model behind how to actually earn trust. It's not just airy-fairy communications. So I encourage you to read the 2016 report first, which gives you the base on public trust model. Then 2017, we continued on with some of our trend data that we've carried on, as well as expanded to go into transparency specifically. So what we learned in 2016 is shared values lead to trust, and some of our food system partners, specifically food companies and government, are really lagging in trust with really, really poor scores. So in 2017, while we looked at the big picture of transparency, we also looked at food companies specifically to say what will it take for them, food manufacturers, to earn more trust through transparency. So I encourage you to take a look at those reports if you're interested in this kind of work. So a few samples of just a couple of the types of questions we ask. This is just a big picture question on, is the food system even headed in the right direction, or are we on the wrong track? So if I encourage you to ask even one question, even within your existing consumer insights work, it would be this one. And then we'll have, the UK comparison to Canada and the US. As you see, it's significantly different between Canada and the US. A lot of people think we're a lot more similar, but we are definitely different. And in Canada, this question, I could show you a question about animal welfare, environment, food safety, biotech. It would almost look identical to this, with half of our population is unsure, which is significantly different than the US. So remember, I said the trends tend to be coming from the EU and the UK into the US and up to Canada. So in Canada, we view this with great optimism to say people haven't already formed strong opinions on many of these topics. They're genuinely shrugging their shoulders and saying, I'm not sure what to think. We put agriculture and food issues into perspective by asking some top overall life concerns. So again, this is trend data. We have some of our trend and tracking data that actually goes back to 2006 with the predecessor groups that I managed, which is really great, because another important message with this is a long-term game plan. This is not a short-term 18-month project. This is something you need to have a 25-year window on. So trending and tracking these questions over time is really important. So this one is important to note that in a big list of questions, in which case, it's probably 25 options, of which you could be really concerned about all of them if you wanted. Note the rising cost of food and keeping healthy food affordable are the top two for the second year in a row, above things like energy, healthcare, and other topics. So really important, because of course all your sector members, they are in the business of providing healthy, affordable food. So really important framing. So part of our coaching is to frame up your role in the food system under the healthy food affordable umbrella, to say, what are you doing to put healthy, affordable food on the plates of your consumers? In the US, healthcare costs is actually higher than the concerns about healthy, affordable food, which is understandable given their healthcare systems different than ours. Where other food system concerns fit, this is just to put some things into context. So for example, humane treatment of farm animals at 40% is significantly lower than the access to healthy, affordable food. So my background is fairly extensive in animal welfare, so I tend to screen everything and view everything with an animal welfare filter. So I would have predicted that would be much higher. So it doesn't mean people don't care about farm animals, but in the bigger picture, it's just important to have context. And the one that hurts my feelings, and the results the same in the US, is people are not concerned about feeding people outside of Canada or the US. So we often in our sector use feeding the hungry world, having enough food, growing more food on less land to feed the hungry world, and that does not resonate with consumers at all. So again, it's just how do we use these insights to inform our messaging. So I mentioned there's a public trust model, and you can read about this in the 2016 report, but I wanted to show you just two examples, and these are not numbers that we release publicly. These are examples of parts of our research that we share with our members. So part of being a CCFI member is you get some value and more insights. So those reports that I pointed you to are our public reports, They're about 24-page reports, and the more, like if millions of people saw those reports, that would be amazing. For our members, we offer deeper dives into some of the topics and some more specific information. So I want to just show you this public trust modeling on environmental sustainability, because I'm going to compare it to animal welfare in a minute, which between all of your sectors, they'll be covered here. So the public trust model shows categories of competence, confidence, responsibility, and trust. And then the outcome of that is social license. So competence, obviously, do I think you're competent to do your job? Farmers were at the top of the list with the highest score of 46%. So that's compared to government, food companies, restaurants, and retailers. So of the long list of people on environmental sustainability, farmers were at the top of the list. Confidence, this is the shared values piece. I'm confident that you're going to do the right thing. Again, farmers at the top of the list. Who has the greatest responsibility for environmental sustainability when it comes to our food? Farmers again. And who has the greatest trust? Farmers again. The highest number on social license, which is freedom to operate, was only 28%. And remember earlier I said social license is not a good goal, because 28% is not really great on the report card, and you've got a long way to go to even just get to 50 as a passing grade. And we segment our data to look at groups like moms, millennials, foodies, and early adopters as really important key target audiences. And all of those groups had very similar findings on this public trust model. And if you're interested in this, again, the 2016 report explains it. So that's environment, and I share that with you because I want to show you the difference between environment and animal welfare. When we go to animal welfare, or as the public would call it, humane treatment of animals, you'll note the difference. So on competence, who's the most competent on animal welfare? Humane treatment. Humane Society's at the top, farmers, quite a drop, and Mercy for Animals, which is an animal rights group here in North America that uses undercover videos as their primary tactic to pressure food companies, restaurants, and grocery stores. So you'll note Mercy for Animals is tied with farmers here on competence on humane treatment, which for those of us with a farm background would know that that is grossly untrue, given that it's a team of lawyers that runs Mercy for Animals. Confidence, who do I feel shares values with me around humane treatment of animals? Humane Society, Mercy for Animals, and people like you. Who's missing from that list? Noticeably absent, farmers. Greatest responsibility on humane treatment is farmers. Greatest trust, again, missing, farmers. So this is a disconnect. This is a challenge. So we see erosion in this number over the last 5 years. And in Canada, in the last 5 years on humane treatment of farm animals, quite frankly, most of consumers, if they've heard anything, it'll definitely be negative news from animal rights activists, protests, undercover videos that I mentioned, and protests and negativity around humane transport of farm animals. So we shouldn't be surprised by this number, but yet we still are. So I just share this with you as an example of the difference between issues and erosion and trust, and where we see disconnects. Now we need to game plan. What are we going to do differently to address this? So in 5 years from now, when we have this conversation globally, because you'll have a UK CCFI, and we'll be able to say, okay, what did we equip our food system with to do better in this space? Note here, millennials didn't rate any group high on any of those trust measures. So we do have special insights into millennials. That's a group we need to spend some time understanding to say that they have overall less trust in all traditional sources. So what are people looking for when it comes to transparency? So we know shared values leads to trust, and we know transparency leads to trust. So if you make a genuine commitment to being open to communications, then we can improve that trust number, which is what we need to do specifically on humane treatment, but of course on all categories. So this is an example of what you can do to categories of information you can share to demonstrate transparency. And the 4 categories are third-party audits, your track record, your actual practices, and your policies. And it sounds like from Jenny's explanation, much of the work you do within your organization would support some of these pieces. So this is really important and goes back to that key public trust framework I shared earlier. You have to actually do the right thing first and then communicate about it to earn trust. And this is the categories of areas people are looking for information on. Who do Canadians hold responsible for transparency? Everyone in the food system, and some a little bit more than others. So at the top of the list is food processors. And if you recall, I said food processors had the lowest level of trust, but the greatest level of responsibility on most food issues, including food safety. That is not a good place to be. You don't want to be most responsible and least trusted. Same thing for transparency. When it came to transparency around excuse me, animal welfare and environment specifically, farmers were actually at the top of the list, which is very healthy. In the US, food processors are responsible for transparency on all food system issues, including animal welfare and environment. And our work demonstrates that that is a loss of trust in farmers when consumers go to a food company to be responsible for animal welfare or environment. They should be looking to farmers first. So note all the people on this list are all the people that fund and come to the table to help make Center for Food Integrity happen. It's really important that the whole food system comes together. Consumers expect it, and we all have expectations on trust and transparency, so why not come together to actually make that happen? We do some work on where people are finding their information. Most people go online to websites or Google, and if they don't go online, they ask family and friends. And where did family and friends get it? They probably went online to get it. So we know the conversations are happening online, and how do we find out and or be part of those conversations? So for example, you'll note the questioning around animal welfare was categorized as humane treatment. So in agriculture here in Canada, we talk about animal welfare all the time. Activists use the word animal cruelty. So what do consumers use, and what are they interested in? And that's humane treatment. So if the activists are driving a big conversation about animal cruelty and we're responding with information around animal welfare online, we're not even in the conversation. So part of our work is the third part of our work is resources and shared resources. So a resource that we're part of, and I encourage you to look at, is that comes from our research, which says people are looking for information online. They want to get information from credible third-party experts. And remember up front, I said this is a conversation about food first, and then it goes back to the farm. So this resource was developed by the US CFI, and again with significant funding to make it happen. Basically, it's creating a platform for university experts to answer questions from the public about anything on their plate. So as I say, is this bacon healthy, to how the pig was treated, to the GMO feed that the pig may or may not have eaten, and or anything else on your plate. So there's over 200 experts on this website, and the website is the base, but it's important to know the content is shared across all social media channels. So basically, what our work shows is consumers are expecting answers on questions on every ingredient in every food product that they may choose to buy. So what company or sector is equipped to answer all that demand? And the answer is basically nobody. So every company doesn't need to own every issue completely with all the technical questions. So this is just an example of a chicken farmer answering a question from a dietitian. We have lots of questions and answers. Over 500 are already on the resource. And as I mentioned, it was already existing with US content. So we've been working on adding Canadian experts and adding Canadian content right into the existing content. So, where it says USDA, we will add Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and making sure the info is appropriate for Canadians. And we're just in the early days of promoting this to Canadian consumers with pretty low budget to date. We reached 80,000 consumers in Canada last year and 1 million overall on the website alone, and then of course all the other social channels. So that's an example of a shared resource that companies like Walmart and Costco and Tesco can all share, so they can answer a consumer question with, thank you for your question on GMOs. That's a really complex and important topic. And here's our company statement. For the specific answer around GMO corn, click here to hear from 5 university experts to hear what they think. So it's meant to be a tool that all our food system partners can share. And then the third pillar of our work is forums for dialogue. And I mentioned this in my first slide about the importance of bringing our own food system partners together. And we do a few forums a year. The big one we do is our National Public Trust Summit. And the purpose of this event is to literally host a forum for dialogue where food system thought leaders from individual farmers through to the biggest retail and food service companies in the country can come together, meet, engage, connect, learn, share ideas. We present our research insights. And this year you'll see it's from insights to action. So day one will be all about research and learning consumer expectations for the future. And then day two is all about actions. What can you do? Which will include a transparency workshop on how you can evaluate how well you're doing on transparency on your own website right there at the summit. The secondary benefit of this forum for dialogue, which we hadn't anticipated in the first year, what is the power of positive energy and bringing like-minded people who want to be proactive and want to do more better together. It's really powerful. We had some seasoned, I would say, old agriculture veterans come to the first summit, say things like, I've never been to a conference when I felt more energized when I left than when I got there. So it's something that, at least in Canada, specifically on the agriculture side, sometimes some of our conferences can be a little negative or a little reactive or a little bit stale. Our summit attracts a lot of younger people, a lot of women, and a lot of people that really want to make a difference. So it's this concept of engaging our own food system and getting them to know each other. The second forum for dialogue we host is a little bit different. So the Public Trust Summit, and I encourage you to join us, by the way. Start saving your pounds now to make the trip across the pond. We would love to see you at our summit. The second type of forum we host is a little bit different. It's more selective, it's smaller, it's a targeted invite audience. And we call these our food system forums. It's a forum for dialogue to teach our biggest food company, retail, and food service executives a little bit more about the most complex topics facing our food system. So as an example, last year we did one on antibiotics, and the goal is if you're a busy food company or grocery executive and you're faced with decisions on something like antibiotics, how do you equip yourself with the knowledge you need to make these decisions? And the reality is it's difficult. So the antibiotic forum, we hosted some experts from the university, from a government, someone talking about labeling, farmers talking about why they use antibiotics and why they don't, and unintended consequences of both choices. And the ending result was, wow, that's complicated, and that is excellent. We want to show some of the food company and food service and retail executives that putting a press release out from their head office in downtown Toronto will not, quote unquote, solve this problem. It's bigger than that. So we'll be hosting one this summer on GMOs and genetics, again with the same forum. So we get about 100 people in the room and really have robust conversations. Part of our model, I mentioned, is bringing the food system together, and I know you have a lot of farmer representatives. We invited 6 farmers to be part of in the room with the 100 of the rest of the food system partners. And the one farmer who's an egg farmer, chair of Egg Farmers of Ontario, a really well-respected farm leader, to this day says that forum on antibiotics was one of the best days he's ever spent as a farm leader, getting the opportunity to have conversations with all those food industry executives, which he doesn't normally get to do. So literally creating the forum for those conversations so they can meet real farmers and understand their point of view from the farm. Training is our fourth pillar, and as I mentioned, that's to come. There's a need for equipping our food system, including those farmers that went to that food system forum. By the way, we did a pilot project with Engage Training on how to communicate and connect with people with shared values first. So how to create a relationship with those food industry executives and engage with them in a way that you say, hey, I really care about animal welfare. I signed up to be an egg farmer because I want to keep chickens alive and feed our country. And some of the things you're doing may not be in line with what my goals are. So let's have that conversation. So training our food system partners on how to use shared values, trust, and transparency, which, as I mentioned, to come, we will be hosting that mini transparency workshop at our summit in November. So that's enough about us. A few tips if you're thinking about bringing this type of work to the UK, and I know Charlie Arnott is the US CFI's CEO and founder, and I know he has made a trip to the UK. I believe it was with your government. I'm not sure exactly who he met with, but I know I can find that info out if this is something you might want to consider. A few things to think about bringing this type of work to your country is this is a new way of thinking. This is leadership. It's not status quo plus one. It's not taking an existing program and saying, you know, let's just tweak it a bit. It's a new approach on how to get the whole food system to work better together. And to make that happen, you definitely would need a respected champion or a small group of champions to drive this work forward. So there was myself and our chair, Kim McConnell, that I mentioned, hosted those discussions on public trust workshops across the country, which was really important to get some data, get some ideas, get some thinking to shape what that public trust framework should look like. It's also equally important to map out what's already being done. I know we refer to your Little Red Tractor program in the UK, a lot of your labeling efforts, etc., good or bad. It's really important to get a lay of the land in terms of what's already being done and to map out what's missing, what's needed, and why. And I can't emphasize the why enough to say, what do you need to do differently that you can change your report card on public trust and try to be as specific as possible, but with that big long-term goal. So, you know, as I say, my dad, the beef farmer in the Ottawa Valley, needs public trust in beef as much as the CEO of McDonald's and everybody else in the food system that makes a living from agri-food. So what can we do better together in the big picture to make a difference? So with big picture thinking to frame the vision and mission, the opposite of that is it's best to start small and focused in terms of your actual execution. So this mandate is huge, but when I talk about our programs and our priorities, it's a narrow focus. So, you know, we've got research, dialogues for forum, resources, and then training to come, and then that's it. This space is so huge, we can't be effective if we get too random and big. And then to wrap up, just a few ideas and a bit of advice to consider. I am a farm girl who has a lot of heart for farm. When we ask consumers, would you like to learn more about farming? Only 20% say yes. When we ask, would you like to know more about farming and where your food comes from? That jumps to 2/3 say yes. That's a huge difference. So they don't want to be educated about farming. But however, the Heart for Farm is a really important piece of trust, Heart for Farm and Heart for Farmers. So to frame it up as a conversation about food, but without leading too heavily with farm up front. This concept of the whole food system at the table, I know I've emphasized that before, but I can't emphasize it enough. In Canada, we've had lots of efforts that were farmer driven, including the work I did, that were very farmer driven, that we get a few food processors to the table, but then that's it. And then at the opposite side, lots of efforts driven by retail or food service, again, with like one token farmer as part of it. So this concept of having the whole food system at the table, literally and figuratively, with money and people power. And it's also important to be broad-based, so including the academia, government, non-government associations. And if you're interested in some of the things I'm talking about, you can absolutely consider launching as a program within an existing organization. That's what we did. That's what some of our groups, Farm and Food Care in Prince Edward Island as an example, is it's part of their Farmers Association, their Farmers Federation. So they've launched as a program. They use all the branding. They still do the same work, but they didn't create a whole new association. So you can think about that. And I would also encourage you not to underestimate your funding model base at the beginning. So if you asked everybody to chip in, 500 pounds to just get things started, but your real goal is, I'm making up the numbers, but if I asked everybody to chip in $500 on the idea, but then I need to go back and sell them as $25,000 members, it's too hard to raise that kind of money later. So we put our accurate funding model base right on the table at the beginning and ask people to invest, to say, if you really believe this is a business risk that needs to be managed, it's worth a significant investment, not to apologize for that. And with that, I will open it up to questions and discussion.
Wow, thank you so much, Crystal. That was a lot of food for thought, without a doubt. So I still have a number of my colleagues on the line. We haven't lost anyone. You'd be glad to hear. A few more have joined us. So if anyone has a question, you've got a question box in front of you. Just type in your question and I'll facilitate that. There's just too many of us on the line to facilitate open mics. So if you don't mind, we'll just go to typing the questions. I've got a few questions to kick off, Crystal, and that last bit that you started with around the kind of funding model, the business model. How much coercion did you have to do at the beginning to get people involved, or were people fairly well bought into the concept?
Well, part of it was that kind of, the connecting with the leaders at those little focus groups that we held across Canada. And then we created a very specific list we started with a list of 6 companies and associations, one in each of the major sectors. And we met with them probably 9 months before we launched and said, we'd already kind of confirmed that they were interested in the concept. So we met with them and said, we need you to be part of this launch. This is leadership. If you step forward and say, yes, we believe this is important, and write a check. And we asked them for 3-year commitments. So 5 of the 6 said yes. The one retailer said no, but the other 5, who were all sector leaders, said yes. Then once they said yes, then we had the next 6. So they're competitors, basically. So in a great way, because remember, this is not to be competitive. So we're like, okay, these 5 have said yes. Now we had the next circle of 6 and then the next circle. So the first 6 are the hardest, but the most important. If you get leaders within each sector, so like a farm group leader, we had a processor leader, retail or food service leader, a feed company, and a seed and crop input company. So those 5 all said yes. As I mentioned, retail didn't. So we just got our first retail money with that Walmart project recently. But we definitely had a very, if you kind of think of it as concentric circles.
Super. And Crystal, in terms of some of your resources that you have available, I'm aware that you've got a really wonderful magazine. I can't remember what it's called. Something about digging the dirt, or...
Oh, yes. The Real Dirt on Farming, which is
That's
farm and food care. Yeah. That's farm and food care. That they're in that amplifier space that I talked about.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the group I used to manage, but we're separate groups now.
Oh, okay. But does that magazine fit under your remit or not?
No. So if we think about the sport, so I'm in the coach space now, right, and the whiteboard space. So that resource, Real Dirt on Farming, which just had a major milestone, that resource started in 2006. They just reached 4 million consumers with the print copy alone, let alone the online on top of that. But that resource uses our research to help determine what goes in it. So my consumer research says, the top 4 concerns are hormones, antibiotics, pesticides, and GMOs. Here are the trusted messengers. Here are the concern statements. The team that writes Real Dirt on Farming uses our research to make sure that that book actually addresses what consumers are interested in.
Okay, because I'd be keen to understand how widely that has been
Mhm.
used or adopted, and what impact it's had, but maybe not a question for you. But one of my colleagues, Susie from our Consumer Insights team, has a question for you. But first, Susie has just sent me an email I've just picked up. Did everyone else see Crystal's slides? I hope that you've all managed to see her slides okay. Just send me a little message on the question box to let me know that you could see her slides. But Susie's question was, how do you get companies over the competitive advantage to into working together? For example, she says here in the UK, all retailers tend to have their own different welfare standards when it comes to milk production. And this becomes very confusing for consumers who then don't know who or what to trust.
Mhm. So that's a really good question. And, we're not miracle workers. So the supply chain was not meant for collaboration. It was meant for competition. So this is very new territory to bring them together. Some of our forums, like that one on antibiotics, some companies, that's like the first time they've ever sat in a room having those kinds of open discussions around a topic like that before. So the pillar of doing the right thing and continuous improvement, in Canada, we have what's called roundtables for different topics. So there's like roundtable for beef, for example, and the roundtables are really tasked with the concept of standards, for example. So in Canada, we have things like codes of practice for animal welfare. So the concept is, at the very least, to get all companies to buy into the code of practice as their base, so they have a common base. And then, of course, some companies will still do what we call bolt-ons on top of that. But our work is meant to help inform them. So if they come to the table to see, this is where short-term competitive thinking can actually erode trust on things like animal welfare. The reality is, though, the people that work in marketing for some of these companies are not the people that come to the table for discussions around things like sustainability. So this is going back to my first slide about the need to identify public trust as a business risk that needs to be managed. And that discussion needs to be at the CEO and vice president level, and then go down to the rest of the company, because quite frankly, and we see it here as well, when the brand advantage and marketing people are running the ship and see a competitive advantage on labeling, it's not going well.
Yeah, it really is a challenge. It's kind of reassuring to hear you've got the same challenges over the pond. Yeah, and it's trying to get all those players to work together for a common goal, which is achievable as you've demonstrated. But it doesn't come without its challenges. All of my colleagues could see your slides. You will be very pleased to hear. So Susie, apologies if you haven't managed to see them, but everybody else has had sight of them. And I have a question here from Claire, who's one of our welfare leads within pork. And she asks, are you able to explain a bit more how the farm animal care review panels function? Actually, Claire, I was just going to ask the exact same question. Great minds think alike. And is there any evidence that they increase trust?
Mm-hmm. So the US CFI created the animal care review panels as a result of the need to provide some kind of third-party credible reporting, specifically after animal welfare related incidents, and most specifically usually tied to undercover videos. So in the US, they've had over 200 undercover video reports, and they're not stopping. In Canada, we've had about 13 so far, and including a couple just a few weeks ago. So the purpose of the Animal Care Review Board is twofold. One is, as part of crisis communications, your first response is, we're going to not make any rash decisions, whether you're a food company, a retailer, or food service, because Center for Food Integrity is conducting an animal care review panel, and to await the report. So in terms of crisis communications, it's your first response that they can use. The second part is it's third-party experts. So the best animal care review panel team is an ethicist, a veterinarian, and an animal welfareist or animal behavior specialist. So those three all review the video independently and write their report, and then release it publicly at the same time. Nobody gets to approve it, including us. We format it and release it publicly to everyone at the same time. So the goal is right now, at least in Canada, what we're seeing is the activist pressure. They're not going loud publicly. The first few undercover videos, they were really loud publicly, all kinds of social media and media coverage, coming soon, undercover video at a pig farm coming in 3 days, there was tons of media. The last one that happened 2 weeks ago, I saw no media or social media. They're specifically just targeting brands. So the value of the third-party review panel report is to say, depending on the findings, is to give perspective to those brands to say, you know what, this farm or processing plant was following the code of practice, that was a normal farm practice, or that was unacceptable, that was on animal cruelty. Whatever the findings are, it's to try to give those food companies some support with some credible information. It's only been activated a few times here in Canada. Knock on wood, we haven't had too many.
And in your opinion, have they been successful?
Well, it's hard to measure the success. I see it as another tool in the toolkit in reacting to a difficult situation. So if a food company uses that report to help them make a decision, because the worst case scenario for a farm is, which we had one egg farm that is a major egg farm that supplies company that goes right through to McDonald's, is if they drop them as a supplier. So it's hard to measure the value of not dropping your farm as a supplier. So I guess I would say if people see value, they'll continue to ask for them and use them, but it's hard to measure that.
Yeah, we've had a tough time in the dairy and the pork industries over the last couple of years with expose videos, and they trickle in at a little bit too fast a rate for some of us to keep on top of. But we don't have any formal process like you guys have with this review panel, so perhaps something for us to reflect on.
Yes, and I do have a little kind of like an overview sheet on how the review panel works that I can send you.
Yeah, that would be really useful, and I can share that with Claire. That would be really, really useful. I don't know if any of my colleagues from any of the crop side have any specific questions for Crystal. I wonder if there's anything specific you around maybe GMO or genetics. You mentioned that you were going to be holding some food system forums on those topics, so they're obviously quite high up on your radar. What do you think the focus of them will be, and what are you hoping for the outcome of that gathering to be?
Well, great question. So it started out as it was going to be a forum on GMOs specifically. And when we started drafting the agenda and reviewing the really great feedback and evaluation we had from the antibiotic forum, we realized, we know 93% of Canadians know little or nothing about farming, and that includes the food industry executives. So we regrouped on the agenda actually just last week and decided we need to give them a base on genetics overall. So traditional breeding, so your best cow to your best bull, right through to gene editing and CRISPR. So we'll give them a base in the morning on that, and then a perspective on regulatory and labeling and the activist pressure points related to genetics. And GMOs will be one piece of it.
Okay, wow. Well, I wish you the best of luck. And the best of luck with that. It would be great to see the output. Do you write up any sort of reports on the back of these forums that you hold or that are available in the public domain, or is that just for your members?
We'll write up a more detailed report for the members, obviously, but we will report on it in our e-news. So if you don't get
Okay.
it, and to your colleagues, if you subscribe, it's free. It comes out once a month. It's not too cumbersome. One just came out today, and you'll get invites to things like our webinars. So we have a webinar coming up next month on transparency, and we'll put a report, a high-level report on the GMO forum for sure.
Super. Okay, does anyone else have any questions for Crystal? No more questions? Everything seemed to be crystal clear.
I always aim for that.
Good, good, good. Excellent, excellent. Well, maybe we'll be able to touch base again at some point in the future. I'd be very keen to stay in touch with you, Crystal, as I'm sure some of my other colleagues will be also. So I would just like to thank you very much for your time, and to also ask if you're happy for us to share the copy of the slides that you sent to me. Are you happy for me to share them with my colleagues?
Yes, absolutely. I'd ask you to just take out those
Yeah.
two public trust models, the two marked confidential. If you take those, the
Yes.
one on
Okay.
environment and the one on animal well-being, take those two out, and the rest, the more the merrier. Happy to share. And you can do a link to the research reports on our website
Yeah.
as well, which people might, that's always the best place to start, is with those two research reports. And our annual report is just on our website now. It just came out a couple of weeks ago, which kind of gives an overview of what we did in the first year, which a lot of people find helpful.
Yeah, super. Brilliant. Well, we'll be keeping a watch and eye. Yeah, some of my colleagues are sending me messages here to thank you for a very interesting webinar. Indeed, was really interesting. Just one question while I think of it. There's a similar model in the US, obviously, that you have brought over to Canada. But are you aware of any other country that has adopted this type of model or that has a similar model of their own?
Well, a lot of discussions have happened in Australia. We
Okay.
actually thought Australia would have had an Australia Center for Food Integrity before we got started in Canada. But to go back to my advice, the key driving champion behind the Australian effort retired. So
Oh,
you really need a couple of champions to make it happen. So
yeah.
Australia hasn't started yet, but there's definitely lots of discussion there. And the other place that's just started to show interest and discussion is Argentina. So I feel I just was at a big conference in the US last week, and there were people from 76 countries, and I shared our work there. And I think the common message is we have a lot more in common than we have differently. So I appreciate everybody's maxed out on their own sector or their own work. So how can we collaborate and share resources? And you just put your UK flag on, I put my Canadian flag on, and then it can help us all learn from each other.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Sounds like a good plan. I would like to thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule and giving us this presentation. I will touch base again in a few months' time. I think that would be really useful if you're happy to do that. Yeah, I wish you a nice rest of your day.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your interest in our work and good attention on the webinar today. And as I mentioned, if you go to foodintegrity.ca, you can sign up for the e-news and you'll get regular updates on what we're up to. That's the easiest plan.
Excellent.
Okay, great. Thanks,
Wonderful.
everyone. All right, have
Thanks
a
very
great day.
much.
Okay,
Yes, you too.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.